Let's move on to this conversation now. International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola says South Africa has been vindicated when it comes to its genocidal intent case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. He was telling members of parliament that Pretoria remains committed to ensuring accountability for the country's war on Gaza. International Relations Director General Zane Dangor joining me now for more on this conversation. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you very much for making time for us. Israel's biggest backer, that's the United States here, saying that they did not approve of Israel's attacks on Qatar, even though they claim, this is Israel now, even though it claimed that it was targeting Hamas leaders. Where do you stand as South Africa on this point?
Look, I think anytime a country uses force without the consent of the Security Council, when there's been no attack on their territory from that country, that's an unlawful act. And there's no justification for it. Hamas is not proscribed in Qatar. They're proscribed in some European countries and the US and Australia. But in Hamas, they are not proscribed. In essence, they are part of the teams and people that Qatar and Egypt and the US is working with to negotiate a peace deal. So any attack like this with the aim of killing them is unlawful. It's a breach of Qatar's territorial integrity. It's a breach on the laws of war. And it's one of those crimes that Israel has been committing routinely. You've been seeing similar attacks on on Syria, on Lebanon, Iran. Breaches of territorial integrity of many of the countries surrounding Israel. So our view is, again, it's an unlawful act, and they must be held accountable for it.
Let's come closer to your statement as South African authorities that you are vindicated by the case that you took to the ICJ. And I'm going to do that using the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. His words also very condemnatory of the Israeli action here. He said, and I quote, "I condemn the strikes Israel carried out on Doha. They do nothing to secure the peace the UK and so many of our allies are committed to." Is that part of this vindication that you're talking about, that world leaders who previously were firmly on Israel's side have gradually moved to understand what is going on in Israel, as South Africa sought to explain at the ICJ?
So look at these incidents, and it has to be welcomed that the Prime Minister of the UK is condemning this particular attack. We also saw similar condemnation from the European Union, and of course the US saying that it was not helpful, which is a form of condemnation and critique as well. So it is against the objectives of securing a peace deal and a ceasefire. And there's been a pattern of actually assassinating the interlocutors that one would be engaging with for peace over the last couple of years by Israel. Our case was, as we've said before, it was one that arises from obligations under the Genocide Convention. And as we indicated to Parliament yesterday, the Genocide Convention is not only about punishing the acts after it has been committed. It is also about preventing a genocide. So we engage to ensure that we prevent further harm to Palestinians. And when we presented to Parliament, we gave them the statistics, the number of deaths, the number of houses, hospitals destroyed just before we went to the court in December 2023. And of course, what we've seen since then is that a lot of what we predicted, including the famine, has come through. So it's not a question of vindication. It's not one of those issues where one would want to be right on these kinds of issues, because with a genocide, and you can see that a large number of the total number of the civilians killed is significantly high, much higher than many of the other wars that we've seen over the last 100 years as a percentage of the population. So it's not something that we are happy about. We don't want to be vindicated. What we want is justice, and we want the genocide to end. And that's why we took this action at the ICJ.
Yeah. Can we go to South Africa's stance on the Russia-Ukraine matter? Because there's been another development there. Russia launching drones over the Polish airspace. Those were put down by that country, and Poland is a NATO member. Some people watching this are saying Russia appears to be provoking a war here, a World War III, if you like. Let's try and balance it out. Where do you stand on what Russia has been doing? Because South Africa has taken what it says is the non-aligned stance here.
A non-aligned stance doesn't mean we take a neutral perspective on the international law. So what you have is a more symmetrical war. It's not asymmetrical like you have in Palestine. You have symmetrical. You've got two of the largest countries in Europe at war with each other. And of course, as you pointed out, also with the involvement of NATO. But at the beginning, we said that irrespective of what Russia's security concerns may have been, there was no armed invasion on Russian territory by Ukraine in 2022. Neither was there an imminent threat. And even the notion of imminent threat is one that, we don't necessarily agree with, because, the proper reading of Article 51 is you can only use self-defense if there has been an attack on your territory by a foreign state. This was not the case. So we've said, of course, that Russia's use of force against Ukraine was unlawful. And Colette, a lot of people tend to forget that, but all our UN statements have reiterated that position. Yeah. We are non-aligned because it's big powers in contestation with each other, and non-aligned is non-aligned from big powers. But we do not take a neutral stance on the illegality of the actions by Russia. Then you've seen the statements that we put out yesterday around the attack on civilians in Ukraine as well, because civilians are never a target. Civilian infrastructure is never a target. The principle of distinction places the onus on those who does the attack to ensure that no civilians are ever harmed. People will find different excuses to legitimize attacks on civilians, and we think that those excuses do not hold water if one actually examines what the Geneva Conventions say, and particularly the principle of distinction, which enjoins those who are carrying out attacks to protect civilians and other non-combatants at all costs. So going back to the Poland issue, I think, again, anytime it is a breach of their territorial integrity, and we are worried that, this could escalate, particularly given that, NATO may be involved, and you've got Article 5 of the NATO agreement, which enjoins all other NATO members to come in and defend any NATO partner. So we would be, again, calling on both the Russians and the Ukrainians to speed up the process towards an immediate ceasefire, so that lays the basis for negotiations to what we've been calling is a just peace. You cannot expect to move towards a just peace when there's a constant war at play. And it's interesting, in the early days when we were calling for an unconditional ceasefire, it was the European and NATO members who said they don't want that because they don't want a frozen conflict. Yeah. Now at least they're agreeing to the fact that you need an unconditional ceasefire. And now, we need to bring both Russians and Ukrainians and others to the table around this unconditional ceasefire. When President Zelensky was here and he met with our president, he actually committed publicly that they will work towards an unconditional ceasefire, which is a good thing because it does lay the basis for the negotiations around the just peace. Now, the just peace component is important because it underscores what South Africa, Brazil, and others have been saying, that we do not agree that there should be any justification for the annexation of land through the use of force. It's prohibited in international law, and we expect all those who are part of the UN Charter to respect it.
Zane Dangor, thank you very much for your time. International Relations Director General, giving us his take on the developments internationally.